Hello and welcome to the week that was. Three reflections that I'd like to share with you. I noticed in passing this week that Standard Chartered Bank is being sued for $2.7 billion in relation to money laundering allegations connected with the one MDB fiasco. Admittedly, events that happened many years ago, but it got me reflecting a little bit on the nature of blame. The tendency when an organization gets itself into trouble is to try and blame somebody, to try and hold somebody to account. I've been doing a lot of work recently in connection with the topical requirement on organizational behavior, which is being published next week in draft consultation form. And I've had the privilege of working with some fascinating behavioral scientists in this context, and I've learned something about blame and culture. What I've learned is, a lot of the time, events that are classified as misconduct are frequently down to non-linear interactions between a number of factors. For example, profitability pressure, the way different people interrelate with themselves, the regulator, the geopolitical climate, the national culture. These are all factors that, when mixed together in a non-linear fashion, go to produce conduct, which sometimes is highly charismatic, highly motivational, fantastic for society, but a lot of the time actually constitutes misconduct. I would argue that whilst holding people to account is important, what is even more important is trying to understand how these non-linear factors relate to each other. The new topical requirement, of which I'll say a lot more about after it's been published, looks at what I call control pressure points. In other words, controls that are likely to provide an early warning detection mechanism that these non-linear factors are leading to behaviors that could become problematic for the organization. So more about that next week. This week also saw me immersed in two audit geeky type themes. The first one is the cyclical internal audit plan. How many of you have a 5-year plan? How many of you have a 1-year plan? How many of you are under pressure to deliver on your plan because you've made a commitment to an audit committee or you've made a commitment to a regulator? How many of you have ever delivered on a 5-year plan? The reason I'm asking is that we live in a highly dynamic risk world. As Richard Chambers would say, the velocity of change in the world of risk is immense and increasing, which prompts me to question whether what we really should be going for are agile, dynamic audit plans that are highly responsive to the world out there. I haven't got a clue what's going to happen next week, let alone in the next 5 years. My final reflection concerns a question that my daughter asked me this week. I was talking about the 3 lines model. So this is a model where the first line generates business and is ultimately accountable for the risk that also generates. The second line oversees and tries to regulate the risk that is created. And the third line, namely the internal audit function, checks that the first line and the second line are operating effectively in relation to each other. And my daughter said, "Dad, why do we need 2 lines or 3 lines? Why not 4 or 5? Perhaps a naive question from someone that I've never managed to convince to become an internal auditor, but actually quite a profound question. And where have I settled on the answer? History indicates that a 2 lines model sometimes is just not enough. Why? Because the second line frequently is immersed and subsumed by the pressures from the first line, to a point where the second line doesn't have that independence and objectivity that comes from proximity. and as a result is compromised. The evidence, Volkswagen, Boeing, and many other interesting disasters. I would argue that where society has an interest in risk being effectively managed for the sake of stakeholders such as myself, yourself, people that can't protect themselves, it's absolutely critical to have a robust corporate governance framework. And I would argue that's where 3 lines, in my opinion, is non-negotiable. A debate that I'm sure will carry on in our profession for many years to come. But let me be clear, I'm crystal clear that these different assurance functions, second line, third line, first line, need to collaborate with themselves, need to rely on each other where it's appropriate to do so, because business needs to be nimble and efficient and not mired in red tape. I did work for an organisation once that probably had 7 lines of defence, the last time I counted. That's not what the world needs when the world is striving to increase growth. But there is a trade-off between reduction of red tape versus protecting the public interest and protecting society. Thank you very much for listening to me. Have a good weekend and talk next week.